Hey, hi, how you going? It's your mate Valstron, and today we're going to check out all the best base pals for each work suitability. Let's take a look. Work suitabilities are the type of work that each pal is able to do, and there are 12 in total. So for example, Splatterina is able to do handiwork, lumbering, medicine production, or transporting, but is not able to do watering or kindling, or any of these other grayed out ones. In addition to being able to do the work, each work suitability is also going to come with a level, which impacts the speed at which the pal completes that work. So for example, Tantris is also able to do handiwork, but only naturally has level 2 handiwork, whereas Splatterina comes with level 4, so she's going to get it done much faster than Tantris would. Now there are ways to increase the work suitability levels for each pal. If you condense a pal all the way up to 4 stars, then it's going to have all of its work suitabilities increased by 1 level, or you can use the new applied technique manuals which were introduced with the Faybreak update, but I'm not going to talk about those much today because they're incredibly rare, and I'm going to operate from the assumption that you can't reliably get enough of them to turn otherwise suboptimal pals into the most optimal pals for your base. Instead, I'm going to be mostly focusing on the pals that naturally have work suitability level 4s, or pals that are just good lower level early game options while you're waiting for that end game meta pal to come along, or pals that have some other kind of utility passive skill or partner skill that makes them useful for your base in some other way. First up we have Kindling, and the best 2 pals for this are going to be Yormantide Ignis and Blazimat Ryu. Now of these 2, I actually recommend going for Yormantide Ignis because you're going to have a much easier time breeding for all the best passive skills, given that Yormantide's breeding tree is open to a lot more pals, whereas Blazimat Ryu can only be bred with itself, so you're going to have to get really lucky with your eggs in order to get those passives. If you can manage to do it though, then Blazimat is going to be a better choice because he's also one of the best mining pals, so you're going to be able to easily swap him between kindling and mining and have a meta pal in both. He also comes with a higher food consumption rate, which is actually a good thing because he's going to eat food more frequently and therefore have a higher uptime on the food buff. Beyond that, if you're looking for some good early game lower level options, I'd next recommend Suitseer or Ragnarhawk. Suitseer is really nice because not only does he have kindling level 3, but he also comes with some other good work suitabilities, including farming, which in this case means you can pop him into a ranch and get bones. But he's also a dark type, which means he's naturally going to have the nocturnal passive and never need to sleep. And Ragnarhawk's really good because he also has kindling level 3, and is just a good early to mid game flying mount that you probably want to have access to anyway. And then later game he transitions into an important power for the Bjorn and Bastagor fight because of his partner skill Flame Wing, which converts the player's damage into fire damage. And then lastly, if you're looking for some other even lower level options, Bushy Noct and Catris Ignis would be my recommends because they have kindling level 2 as well as some other good work suitabilities. Like you can see Bushy Noct has lumbering level 3, and both of these are dark types as well, so you're gonna get the benefit of the nocturnal passive from them. Next up we have watering, and again there are only 2 options in this work suitability that naturally get all the way up to level 4, and those are Yormantide and the new Phalaris Aqua, who was introduced with the Faybreak update. Now the thing I really like about Phalaris Aqua is that not only does it take up less visual space around the base, which is a huge quality of life improvement, but it also has a secondary work suitability in transporting, whereas Yormantide only has watering. And most importantly, the food consumption rate on Phalaris Aqua is a little bit higher at 8, whereas Yormantide is only 7. So in theory, that should mean that we get a little more production output from Phalaris Aqua over a long enough period of time, because there should be a higher uptime on the food buff. Now, I have to admit, I haven't actually done that testing for these 2 pals, but I have done it for Splatterina and Anubis, and if you want to go and check that out, I'll leave a link to the video up here. But in theory, that principle should still hold. Now, the only thing I'll say against that is that I have seen some incredibly thorough testing done by other content creators showing that when you give the work suitability manuals to Celery, then it becomes the highest performing watering pal, which seems at odds with this theory because the food consumption rate is really low. And the only thing I'll say there is that I believe that testing was done over just 1 day-night cycle, whereas in my testing, I found that you didn't actually see the benefits of the food consumption rate until you tested over multiple day-night cycles, of which I did 5. because on the first day, the pals didn't actually eat at all, given that I started them off from full nutrition. So yeah, you really need multiple day-night cycles before you start seeing the benefits of having a higher food consumption rate. But if you've done that testing or have any more information on that, I'd love to hear about it in the comments down below. But for now, I believe I'll be sticking with Phalaris Aqua, and it's also just easier to get because he naturally starts off at work suitability level 4, so you don't have to go and get a whole bunch of the applied technique manuals. But if you're looking for some lower level options, Azurobe comes with watering level 3, and you can get it as a level 17 world boss. Penkin comes as a level 15 world boss, and although it only has watering level 2, also has a really good array of other work suitabilities. And then lastly, I'd recommend Killamari because it's a dark type and comes with nocturnal. But again, this is only level watering 1. This one is a really good choice if you can actually get the applied technique manuals to push it all the way up to level 5, because you are going to get that free passive on top of it. Moving on now to Gathering. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one because I already did a video about it in isolation, but the main thing you need to know is that not only does the Gathering level increase the speed at which you're going to gather, it also increases the amount of yield you're going to get from each crop. So you want to make sure you go ahead and turn this suitability off for any pals that you don't want to be doing your Gathering. Now the best pal for this is Frostallion Noct, because that's the only one that naturally gets up to level 4 in this work suitability. But another good option for lower level early game is Verdash, because it also has a lot of other viable work suitabilities. And then finally, Shroomer Noct and Prunelia are going to be really good choices as well. Even though their Gathering is only level 2, they both come with really good partner skills that are going to benefit your base in some other way. So Prunelia has the skill Prayer for the Abundant Harvest, which is going to increase your crop yields. And then Shroomer Noct has the Swooshy Spores passive, which is going to decrease the rate at which your pals lose sanity. So you probably want to try and get one of each of these in base if you have the room for it anyway. And then they're both dark types as well, so again, they're benefiting from naturally being nocturnal. As for planting, you're already going to notice that there's a lot of crossover between this and Gathering, but Lylene is going to be the only level 4 option, and like I said before, you want to go ahead and make sure you turn her Gathering off so that she doesn't get lower level half yields. Aside from that, Prunelia is a good level 3 option and has a lot of other work suitabilities, plus has the passive that we just talked about. Shroomer Noct and Lulu, as well as Verdash, are all level 2 options. The only thing I'll add here is that Lulu also has another partner skill, which is going to benefit your base by increasing the growth rate of your crops. Now, mining's a really interesting one because we're so spoiled for choice here and have 4 options all vying for the top spot. Now, I'm going to give the edge to Astagon because he is a dark type, so you're going to get no downtime. But Blazamart Ryu and Noclim are both really good choices as well because of their crossover with the other work suitabilities. Of these two, Noclim is probably going to be a bit better because, again, it's going to be easier to breed the perfect passives into Noclim, and transporting is a really good secondary passive to have. For lower level options, I'd recommend Digtoys, who has mining level 3, and I'll pop up the locations where you can find him on screen now. Next up we have the Handiwork pals, and as I alluded to before, I've already done some testing to compare Splatterina against Anubis. Now you might be wondering why I discounted Silene even though she has Handiwork level 4 as well, and that's just because she's going to be a lot harder to breed into, so I wouldn't recommend her as an option. But between these two, it's really going to come down to whether or not you play at night. If you don't play at night, I'd recommend Anubis, and if you do, I'd recommend Splatterina. Now the reason for this is when I tested it, they each worked a full 5-day night cycles, and I just wanted to see which one would produce more energy cartridges in total. So Splatterina ended up producing 27,849, and Anubis produced 25,491. Now obviously they had the same passives, and Anubis was sleeping during the night, which is why Splatterina was able to get more. However, given that the food consumption rate on Anubis is higher, when I looked at only the amount they produced during the day, Splatterina only produced 22,454, whereas Anubis produced that same 25,491. As for accessibility though, I would give the edge to Splatterina because there's a lot more pals that you can combine through breeding to get her in the early game. And other good early game choices are Verdash and Wix and Noct, who we've talked about earlier in the video as well. Next up is electricity generation, and the two best pals here are going to be Orzurk and Azumane. Now this one's really close, but I'd probably give the edge to Orzurk just because he's got that slightly higher food consumption rate. Although I will say Azumane is going to be a lot easier to access because there's a lot more breeding lines to get him. Now, as for lower tier options, there's not really a lot of good ones, to be honest. Hellzephyr Lux and Grisbolt both have level 3 electricity production, but they're both kind of hard to get. So Grisbolt you have to breed for, and Hellzephyr Lux you either have to breed for or you're not going to find him until you hit Sakurajima. The only one that is probably a true early game accessible pal is going to be Rayhound with level 2 electricity generation. Now, the last thing I will say about energy production is that this is going to be the one that you want to push up to level 5 and get all the best passives for as soon as you can. And the reason for that is that there is such a massive discrepancy between how much stuff you can power with a fully maxed out pal compared to a suboptimal one. For example, at my oil base, my one ore circ is able to fully power 6 oil extractors along with all my furnaces and all my other production equipment. And I see a lot of videos and online content or discussion by other people saying, hey, I've got to use like 10 pals just to get a couple of oil extractors going. So I'd highly recommend pushing for this as soon as you can. On the home stretch now, we're talking about lumbering next, and thankfully we finally managed to get a level 4 lumbering pal with the Fabric update in Celestia. Before that, the best option was really Bushy Noct with level 3 lumbering because he's a dark type and has some other good work suitabilities, but personally I don't actually use either of these two. I just use Shroomer Noct even though he's only lumbering level 2. And the reason for that is simply that you don't need that much timber in the end game. So Shroomer Noct is more than enough for all of my end game needs. And like we talked about earlier, you want one in base anyway because of his passive skill. Next up is going to be medicine production, and unfortunately the only 2 pals that get level 4 naturally in this are the 2 Bellinors that you can only get from raids. So getting the right passives on these is going to be really hard because they only breed with themselves. But thankfully, you don't actually need that much medicine production either, so you're not really going to feel stressed by not having a, maxed out pal with level 5 medicine production here. As good secondary options, there's Felbat, Prunelia and Splatterina, who we've already talked about, that all have level 3 medicine production, and these are going to be more than enough to get pretty much everything you need done. Prunelia is a really good choice because, like we've already talked about, she has the passives that are going to benefit your base anyway. She has a lot of other good work suitabilities, same with Splatterina, who has Handiwork. And then Felbat maybe is a nice choice if you've got to get Felbats anyway, because these are really good late game pals for their lifesteal passive. Second to last, we have transporting, and there are 3 pals that naturally get up to level 4 in this work suitability, and those are Nocklum, Wumpo, and Wumpo Botan. But of these, I'm just going to recommend sticking to the Nocklum. It has the higher food consumption rate, which, like we've been talking about, is going to give it more uptime on its food bonus, and it's just a better endgame pal that you want to be breeding a bunch of anyway for condensing. The Wumpo isn't too bad because it has a few other good work suitabilities like lumbering and the cooling. But beyond that, I'd recommend Hellzephyr and Vanworm as your 2 lower level early game options because they're both dark types, they have transporting level 3, and they're just decent flying mounts that you might want to have access to anyway. And then finally, we're moving on to cooling, and the 2 best pals here are going to be Bastigor and Frostallion, but I'm going to give the edge to Bastigor just because it's going to be a lot easier to breed passives into Bastigor because Frostallion only breeds with itself. And as second tier options, I'd recommend Vinworm Christ or Penking. Penking is good because of all the other work suitabilities, and Vinworm Christ is great because he's also a dark type, so you're going to get the nocturnal passive. And that's everything for today. If you enjoyed this and you found it informative, remember to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments down below if I neglected any of your favorite base pals. But other than that, I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching and have a good one.